Hello again, Zach Wilson, Hood County Chess Club here, continuing the series on attacking the king. Today, instead of looking at a popular checkmate pattern, we're looking at a very powerful tactic called the double check. We're going to start off with a very simple game, 7 moves. It was taken from the 1859 New York tournament, and it just immediately shows the power of the double check. So, traditional opening move here to the center. Very popular back in the mid to late 1800s was the King's Gambit, offering up a free pawn from the flank to displace the center pawn, and black accepted the gambit here. And this is a very important knight move against the King's Gambit. If you've never seen it, you do have to watch out for this queen coming along this diagonal that is now weak because white moved their f-pawn. So very important to put the knight on f3 to defend the h4 square. Okay, so attacking the center, counterattacking and developing pieces. And we can see immediately that the center is being ripped open from the start of the game. And this is a great example of how kings are very unsafe in the center. And that's why we talk a lot about in the opening, you attack the center, you develop your pieces, but you also worry about king safety, getting castled to one side or the other. And here black decides to develop with a traditional pin, just trying to pin this knight against its king. It's a very common example. And white sets up a deadly attack. Go ahead and pause the video if you want to see what the answer is. But black makes a mistake capturing here. He thinks he's attacking the queen, and that's not good enough because we can see that this queen has an X-ray attack or a potential discovered attack on black's king in the center. And when white moves the knight, we can see the double check happening. This knight is attacking the king, okay? This queen is also attacking the king. And so in a double check situation, you have to remember that a check, the king can escape 3 different ways. You can escape simply by capturing the offending piece. Well, this queen is causing a check, and so this bishop could potentially capture the queen, except that it doesn't deal with this knight. That's the power of the double check. You cannot capture one piece and dissolve both attacks. The next idea would be to block. For instance, black might consider putting his bishop here on e7 to block the queen's attack. Unfortunately, it doesn't block both attacks, and we still have the check coming from the knight. So then that leaves us only with the third option, which is the king running away. Well, if you look at it, where can this king run away to? He only has 2 available squares. Of those 2 available squares, the queen is covering this one, and the knight is covering this one. So he has no runaway squares. So the double check is very powerful indeed. As soon as you see a double check, you know that the only option for the king is to run away. So this threat of the bishop on this queen is completely nullified. Same with this pawn on this knight, or this knight on this knight, or this queen. The knight is totally safe because of the double check. So let's take a look at the double check while it's in action. We're going to look at an opening trap here. And again, attacking the center, very traditional moves and a king's pawn opening. The Italian game with bishop to c4. Bishop c5 is one of the most popular responses. Both of these bishops, by the way, are attacking the weakest square in each of their opponent's positions. The f-pawn, which is only initially defended by the king. And this d3 move, we're not going to talk about opening theory here. There's much more popular moves here. For instance, I really love the Evans Gambit. Other folks would say maybe move this pawn first to support this pawn making a double step, ripping open the center. Okay, so d3, an old idea. And this is a big mistake. Most of us, I think, would put our knight on f6, and we don't even know why. We're just told put your knight on f6. And one of the reasons why is that it's covering the h5 square. And why is the h5 square so important? Because from the starting position, the queen has easy access to the weak f7 square. So that king, or that knight, really wants to protect its king from the f7 square most of the time. So that allows this knight to jump in, again, bringing pressure to the f7 square. And we can see that this queen wants to come and add additional pressure to the f7 square. So he castles, in comes the queen, and he has to move this pawn here. Why? What is the threat? The knight is covering the h7 square, and of course the queen wants to come in and say checkmate. So black must immediately defend the checkmate. The problem is that we have 1, 2, 3 attackers against the f7 square. So in comes the knight, and what's the knight really doing here? Threatening to capture the queen. And what black should do is give up the exchange. And what that means is trading off his major piece, or his rook, for the minor piece, the knight. Now, many of you probably know how to count material value. Knights are worth 3 points or 3 pawns. A rook is worth 5. The question is why? What makes one a major piece and one a minor piece? If you look at some of our videos on endgames and how to checkmate the king with minimal material, what you'll learn is just a lone king with a single rook against a lone king can cause or force a checkmate using a maneuver called shrink the box. A knight, however, cannot get the job done. If all you have is a knight, it's a draw. So you don't want to be giving up major pieces for minor pieces unless you absolutely have to. So in this position, we could say that white has won the exchange by forcing black to trade off a rook for a knight. However, black doesn't see the threat and says, no, I'll just move my queen, maybe even put a little threat here if the knight should move. Unaware of the tactic of the double threat, or the double check, excuse me. And here it is. The knight and the bishop are both checking the king. And as we discussed before, that means the only option for black is for the king to move. And it doesn't matter which square he moves to. We can now give a discovered check, because this knight moved out of the way and blocked this queen's access to capturing. So now the king only has one runaway square, and checkmate. There we go. Had black seen the threat, he would have sacrificed the exchange and the game would have continued. White would have had a great advantage. So oftentimes for the double check, you want to prepare the double check with a sacrifice. Sacrificing a piece to lure the king onto a dangerous square that a double check can occur at. You've heard me say before in other videos that when I'm studying the game and watching grandmasters teach the game, they often use a phrase that amateurs look at the pieces and grandmasters look at the squares. And the idea here is just to talk about that if you want to take your game to the next level, you have to not only look at where the pieces are at, but you have to look at the squares and the value of those squares. Are they an outpost for a piece? Are they a dangerous square that a piece would not want to be on and that you might want to deflect or decoy them onto? And let's take a look at that in this game that ended in 14 moves. So again, attacking the center. Here we have the Scotch, immediately attacking with d4. And there's lots of different options here in the Scotch. This is just one of them. And you can see how the center is opening up immediately. White's developing pieces and attacking, and we have our first major mistake by black. Foolish Freddy, the f-pawn, leaves his important square. Remember earlier we talked about how this queen has easy access to h5. Why would you open up that diagonal? That's just not a good idea. So in comes the queen taking advantage. Black thinks he has a simple prevention, but then we have this popular tactic. And the idea here is that if black takes the knight, then the queen takes the rook, and as we discussed in the previous example, white is up the exchange, having traded a minor piece, the knight, for a major piece, the rook. And that would be considered a severe advantage for white, or disadvantage for black, here on move 7 of the game. And so black doesn't want to go down the sacrifice, and simply attacks the queen here. And so now we have our sacrifice to lure the king to a deadly square. If you want to pause the video and try and see what you would do, go ahead and do that. But here white sacrifices the bishop. Black only has one move here, and that is the king capturing, luring him to the dangerous f7 square. Can you see it? Double check. The knight, the queen, double check the king, and the king doesn't have a whole lot of places to go here. Okay, so the king has to escape, and in comes the white queen protected by the knight. Now, This is a forced checkmate in 7 moves, although black could choose to lose a lot sooner. What if black simply takes the undefended knight? Checkmate. Where's he going to go? Completely covered by the queen, who is protected by the pawn, and he can't go through his own place, his own piece. Okay, so we'll back that up a moment. He obviously can't take that. What if he simply ran to the side? Okay. Give me just a moment here. So he runs to the side. In comes the knight, giving a check. And now he has 2 options again. This time if he simply marches over to the side, pardon me, then we have checkmate. So we can see that the pieces are moving here, attacking the king, and he doesn't have a whole lot of options. And so as he runs, we continue to chase. He has to run, we chase, he has to run, and we checkmate. And if you go back and watch that slowly, you're going to notice that those are all forced moves. Here, black doesn't have a whole lot of choices. Black could either take the knight or move to the side. And we saw that moving to the side led to checkmate taking the knight led to checkmate instantly. So that move obviously isn't good. So we only had one viable option. Okay. So we maneuver the knight into check and giving us more options here. And again, the king only has 2 choices. If the king steps to the side, then we have checkmate. Okay. So then the king has to run. And as we follow it, you can see how the software, when I touch the king, shows with the green dot, he only has one viable move here. And again, check, only one viable move, and then checkmate. I encourage you to go back and replay that game from the beginning, watch the video several times, and see if you can find the moves on your own. Now here's a very famous example, Richard Réti versus Tartakower. This is 2 grandmasters in 1910, one of the most famous examples of double check. It is probably shown as an example in every chess book ever written describing the double check and the power of it. So we'll just go through these moves. It is the Caro-Kann opening, main line, one of the 3 main line offerings. The other options are bishop to f5, knight over here to d7, or the move here, knight to f6. And why the queen to d3? This, if you see this happening, it's probably because white wants to castle queenside. And black should not have opened up the center with his king exposed. The more traditional move is to put this pawn here and have what we call the Caro-Kann or Slav pawn structure that looks like this. It's a very strong vault that is a tough nut to crack, but he tries to open up the center, which is a little premature. Okay, so we open the center. Black doesn't want to exchange queens here, although maybe it would have been advised to do so. He uses a very popular maneuver that everyone should have memorized, which is queen to a5, check, and forking anything that's along the 5th rank, whether it's white's bishop that is often here, as an example. So here comes that check, we block, he gets the pawn back. Okay, seems reasonable. Here we are castling, and why is this castling so important? It lines up the queen and the rook staring here at the king. It's an immediate aggressive assault. Okay? Well, let's take a look at this move here for just a moment. When castling, white did something very suspicious. He left this poor knight in danger. We can see that the queen is attacking and the queen is defending, so that would be even, but we have an extra piece here. So black gets a free knight. But remember from the earlier example, we sacrifice to prepare the double check. We sacrifice the queen, luring or forcing the king onto a deadly square. Double check. The rook, the bishop, both attacking the king in the center of the board. And it doesn't matter where black goes here. If black goes to c7, as he did in the game, in comes the bishop with checkmate. As you can see, there's nowhere for black to go. His own pawns have blocked him in, as well as his pieces. Back it up a couple of moves. What if black simply stepped to the side? Hopefully in our series on attacking the king, you recognize how rooks and bishops work together. And he's checkmated. So that is the famous Réti versus Tartakower in 1910. Here's a quick example, Schulten versus Horwitz, 1846. We'll just go through these moves quite quickly without too much commentary. The Vienna game and a pawn gambit or pawn sacrifice. Attacking the center. You can see that this square is in danger. That's why this queen is here defending it. Black gets castled, a wise maneuver. White is wasting time just trying to, I see what he's doing here. He's trying to add defense and fork maybe a trade. So black just takes care of that pretty easily. And now we see what looks like a sacrifice. He throws away the bishop to clear the pawn. However, we have another one of those queen forks. Check, block, capture. So it was more of a bishop trade, picking up a free pawn and opening up a line against a king in the center. So white, I think, makes a very grave error here, thinking that he has to defend this pawn. The problem is he didn't get castled and the king is still in the center. That allows this maneuver by black, trying to rip things open. And rip them open he did. Look at this. We now have a line not only against a spot against the king, but also against this queen. So white gets his queen to safety and black sacrifices, luring the king onto a deadly square. Double check, mate, using the rook and the bishop. Very similar to Réti's mate or Réti's attacking idea, where the rook comes in, defended by the bishop, using a queen sacrifice to lure him onto the square where the checkmate was going to occur. So in this position, you have to ask yourself, would you have thought of this sacrifice of the queen? Would you have noticed that luring him there gives you access to a double check and then a checkmate? Start looking for those opportunities in your next game. This one was played in Antwerp in 1931. What I love about this is that it was a blind simultaneous exhibition. And what that means is back in the 1800s, early 1900s, famous chess masters would travel around from city to city throughout Europe and then here in the United States, showcasing their chess skills. And so they would play blind against an opponent where the opponent would have some kind of barrier blocking their view of the game, where they would turn around backwards and they would just have to close their eyes and visualize the board and name their moves. And so, for instance, if they were the white pieces, they would have their eyes closed and say E4, and the person with the chessboard would move the pawn out to E4. And then when black makes their move, they would tell him, C6, and they would have to memorize and visualize the play. Well, not only was it blind, but it was simultaneous. He was playing blind against multiple opponents. And so this is where studying the game of chess comes in handy, because you're going to memorize certain maneuvers, popular opening theory, popular tactics and strategies. Now here we're going to see some terrible moves by black. Wasting time. Yes, he got a free pawn, but at what expense? Moving his queen twice back to its starting square. And so now we've had an even number of moves, and take a look here. White has 3 pieces developed. Black has 1 piece developed. This is a prime example of how a lead in development wins games. So don't make wasteful moves. Okay. Trading off one of black's only developed pieces, again showcasing 3 versus 1 on development. Trading off another piece, and we see this maneuver that we talked about in a previous example. Queen to A5, check, and fork, picking up the piece on the 5th rank. Okay, but still after an equal number of moves, we have 3 pieces developed to 1 piece developed. And we're going to see the power of this in a moment. Queenside castling is a good idea when the D file is open, because it immediately places your rook on that file while getting your king to safety. What is black doing here? Continuing to move his queen. Sure, you can pick up a pawn, but this isn't Pac-Man. We're not trying to gobble up all the little dots here. Why are all of your pieces stuck on the back rank while your poor king is stuck in the center of the board. This is just not a good idea. And so white sees this, remembers Richard Réti's famous mating pattern, allows black to have the pawn. Now black's thinking he's having a great game here. Look at this. He is threatening checkmate, but white doesn't care. Sacrifice, lure, double check. Where are you going to go? Checkmate, and it's over. So that's why you want to study these popular mating patterns and these famous games. Speaking of famous games, we're going to end the video on this game. It's called the Evergreen Game. It's incredibly famous between Anderssen and Dufresne in 1852. Many grandmasters have said that every amateur and budding master needs to commit this game to memory, move by move. So I encourage you to watch this game, rewind the video, practice it over the board with a friend, because remember, you are what you repeat. Here we go, quickly through this game. Attacking the center, the Italian game, the Evans Gambit. Most of these moves are popular theory, attacking the center. And now we can see the attack against f7, with the knight coming as well. So of course we see the defense, trying to open up the center, because we see that this rook could immediately attack the king in the center, which is very powerful against the Evans Gambit. So now this bishop is trying to help against the castled position. This bishop really wants to fork these two squares, which is why black is hesitant to castle and put his king here, because of the fork. So he tries to misplace some pieces, making some attacks, and just attacking the center. All of these very thought out maneuvers, putting a discovered threat here. And now we see the attack begin. The knight sacrifices itself, trying to open things up. Earlier videos, we heard that this is called the nail, or the nail in the coffin, because a pawn covering runaway squares can be very powerful along the 6th rank. But now black puts threats forth of his own. We see the pin. This pawn cannot protect this knight any longer. White ignores it with this move, and this is why everybody says commit this game to memory. We want to notice everything that white has here. The rook's coming down the open center with a king in the center. There are no white pawns in the way. The nail, the queen, the bishop, and this bishop here as well. And so white has an awfully strong attack. However, black has thoughts of his own. So he picks up the free knight, staring at the checkmate. He is one move away from checkmate, and what does white do here? Pause the video and see if you can figure out, does white have an attack? Is white losing or is white winning? And if you can't figure it out, come back to the video. But this is why the Evergreen Game is so famous, and why everybody should memorize it and play it with their friend over the board. Check. Sacrifices the rook to open up lines of attack. Okay? Check. Sacrifices the queen after sacrificing a rook. My goodness, we're just giving pieces away here. Double check. Oh boy, what's black to do? His only square that he can go to. Okay? Check again, covered by the rook. Moves away, and checkmate. Let's back that up and see that again. That was incredible. So black has a deadly attack. White is one move away from losing. Throws away the rook to open up a line of attack. Throws away the queen to open up a double check. The power of the double check. This bishop cannot be taken by the queen. This rook cannot be blocked by any of these pieces. The king has to move. Another check, and it's checkmate. Well, I hope you enjoyed learning about the double check and the power of it. I encourage you to watch this video again and just memorize some of the ideas, especially sacrificing a piece to lure the king to a deadly square where the double check can occur. Until next time, please visit us on Facebook at Hood County Chess Club. Press the like button to follow us for local events. I'm Zach Wilson, Hood County Chess.